Hi, I'm Joan Gore with AIEA's Digital Video Project, interviewing folks who are the second generation of leaders in American international education, the first generation after World War II. We interviewed in the mid-90s, and now we're interviewing those of us who have been in the field, some of us for 30 or more years, who are really the second generation of people who've led in the transformation of this field. And I'm very pleased to have today someone who brings yet another very unique perspective, and that is the perspective of working with an academic association that represents hundreds of American institutions and institutions abroad as well. And that is an interesting component of international education that we often overlook when we focus so strongly on institutional memberships, institutional projects and activities, etc. Our guest today is Arlene Jackson, who is, since 2001, the Director of International Education for the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, ASCU, based in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, for many years, within an institution at Virginia Commonwealth University, and has had a diverse career in consulting, in international education across the board. And so it's a pleasure to have you. And I know, like all my other guests, she doesn't want to do this, but we're going to have fun.
Thank you, Joan.
So I actually would like to start just briefly with your talking about how you got in this field and why you got in the field, and the trajectory of your career. And then we're going to talk a lot about ASCU and what does an association do in this field.
Thank you for asking me to participate in this project. I began my academic career at Fairleigh Dickinson University with a major in international studies, undergraduate and graduate level. During the time as a student, I actually worked in the Foreign Student Advisor's Office. Summers before that, I worked in the local immigration office as an immigration officer, preparing those documents that I came to know so well when I became a professional in the field. Fairleigh Dickinson University has gone on to become one of the premier liberal arts colleges in internationalization under the leadership of President Mike Adams. Mm-hmm. And so I'm proud to be a graduate of an institution that is doing so much internationally. Immediately upon completing my graduate program, I was hired at the Institute of International Education in New York. And that just opened up a plethora of opportunities and increased my knowledge of the field in so many ways. And so I worked there primarily with the Fulbright program. Then it was also the South Africa student program. During the apartheid era, we brought African students from South Africa to the United States to continue their degrees, and I was responsible for that program also in the early stages. My work in the field has been somewhat eclectic. I went on to be self-employed for the next 15 years with a contract with USIA and Operation Crossroads Africa, among others.
What kind of work did you do with those two?
Program administration,
mm-hmm.
developing programs and educational travel tours to Africa during the years of self-employment.
Right.
I went on to, I worked for Alvin Ailey for the last year and a half.
The ballet company?
Yes, and was responsible for their international enrollment at the school. And I was the foreign student advisor for him and worked with him to bring dancers over on.
Just so interesting, because these are all areas oftentimes we really don't think about when we realize the scope of international education.
Exactly. So it's been roles that have led me to academic and non-academic positions, but always in international education and exchange.
Right.
And in 1993, I moved to Richmond, Virginia, where I became the director of their Center for International Programs, growing the study abroad piece, making the English language program more entrepreneurial. We wrote contracts with some of the corporations in the city and marketed our ESL in such a way that it generated revenue that could support other initiatives that we began at the center.
Which is something also we haven't talked a lot about in some of our interviews, and which is a real issue in the whole field.
Oh, most definitely. And when you're on an academic campus, you need to combine your SIO skills with entrepreneurial expertise so that you can generate money and be self-sufficient and not depend on the university and some of the limited resources that come out of those budgets.
And that led you then to ASCII, which is a very different level of work and type of work.
Yes. ASCII is a presidential association with over 420 members.
Are they primarily U.S.?
The membership includes all of the 50 states, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Virgin Islands. Mm-hmm. The only state that does not have an ASCII member is Wyoming, because their system is land grant membership
Right.
with APLU.
Right. Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, an area of real interest. So tell me a little bit about what ASCII was doing in international education then.
Prior to hiring me, very little.
Right. And I think that was true of most of the associations, except maybe ACE.
I agree. The other 5 associations also were probably doing minimal work at that level.
Right.
I think beginning in 2001, we saw the hiring of international directors at the Community College Association, at APLU, which was nostalgic then, at ASCII. ACE took a broader responsibility with Madeline Green and Krista Olson taking the lead there. And so you saw the associations reaching out to provide advocacy at the state and federal level, program development, professional development for the presidents and their senior cabinet. And I would venture to say prior to 2001, SIOs were not necessarily considered members of the senior cabinet. As the institutions began to work more towards building the comprehensive internationalization process, then SIOs were included in that discussion on campus.
And what role would ASCII play for these campuses?
We began in 2001 by attempting to be strategic in defining our role, because it was a one-person office. And
still is it not?
Well, yeah.
But which will be astonishing when we come to the present day and the scope of work that you do.
Well, so ASCII had a long-standing agreement with the China Educational Association for International Education. For 40 years we've had this partnership. ASCII was also invited to come to China to assist in the creation of this organization, because they wanted it to model ASCII in serving their members.
So were they peer institutions in some ways? They could define these as parallel institutions to ASCII members?
In China, all of the schools that are recognized by the Ministry of Education are automatically members of CEAIE.
Okay.
And so we began to reestablish our linkages and our partnerships with this organization. And my first day at ASCII, I wrote my first project description for something called the Sino-American Leadership Training Program, SALT. And it was designed to take presidents to China, almost a familiarization educational tour that would allow them to learn more about the Chinese higher education system, to also match them to academic partnerships in China, because I am a strong believer that sustainable programs are really only possible if you have solid institutional partnerships and linkages. And so throughout the years, since 2001 to now, we've created over 200 academic linkages between ASCII institutions and programs in China. And as we look to other regions of the world, China and Asia continue to be our primary area of responsibility.
Let's talk about that a little bit. And I do want to go to other regions of the world, because I know that ASCII does work in Latin America, certainly in Japan, in Africa, etc. And so I want to be sure that we talk about the scope of what you're doing. But I know that China is a core. Mm-hmm. And so tell me a little bit about how you moved from helping American university presidents from all over the country, sometimes small state institutions who had no internationalizations, from that to the point where you are today with this plethora of relationships and a very successful joint degree program.
Yes. Shortly after I joined ASCU, and you remember Tiananmen Square was not too far off in our memory base.
Right.
It was difficult for Chinese students to get visas to study in the United States, and that was the perception on the Chinese side. And on the American side, the perception was, well, students from China don't return home. So I thought the best way to respond to both of these ideas about Chinese mobility, student mobility, was to design a program called the 1+2+1 program. One of our members had attempted this, Troy University, but they were not getting the visas to get the students out. And so I decided to go to China to visit the consulate, and the embassy, and to basically talk about why comprehensive public institutions were important to be involved in this process of recruitment and retention of international students, particularly from China. And we took the Troy model. We did a call to ASCU members, and we divided up the responses into small cohorts of 5 to 7 institutions, and we rolled them in to begin a dual degree program. 1 year in China, 2+ years in the United States, because taking into consideration that they all needed English language. And then the final degree requirements were taken back at their home institution in China. This program now has over 126 universities participating in it.
Is that from China and the U.S.?
Combined,
Yeah.
about 100 and some in China and 20-some ASCU institutions. 2,500 students have gone through the program. It's been recognized by the Ministry of Education as a program of excellence. We have over 11 volumes of articulation agreements where we have worked with the Chinese institutions and the American institutions to define the curricula in such a way to ensure credit transfer for all participants at the undergraduate and graduate level. We graduate about 250 to 275 students each year from the program in China. We hold a graduation in China. And we enroll about 300 students each year on our ASCU institutions.
And with the graduation, you use the university in China that has sent the most students that year, and it is held there.
Yeah.
And the university presidents from America and the Chinese university presidents and the students and the parents all go.
Yes. They
Which
all
is remarkable.
We have about 600 or 700 people at the graduation.
Right.
Both presidents stand up and confer both of their degrees. Last year's graduation, we had 270 some students graduate, and 2/3 of them are on high honors.
Wow. So
Recognized by both institutions.
the impact on the Chinese students seems very strong.
The impact on higher education in China has been phenomenal. When we started the program, I not only worked with the Ministry of Education, but we also met with the workforce development people in China to define the majors 5 to 6 years out that would be the majors that were needed in country. We also met with the 6 accrediting organizations in the United States to let them know that this was a new concept. When we started it in 2001, it was a very new concept. Since then, it is much more accepted and much more widely used across the board, not just in China, but in other countries around the world. And so we began with, the usual business, computer science, just a select group of majors. And now we have a very wide spectrum of majors that include sports management, voice, music. It's just wonderful to see these students coming in studying in such a variety of fields. They are so well equipped to be not only global citizens, but to be so competitive in their professions when they return home. They have knowledge of a different culture. They have the ability to communicate in more than one language, and they have been extremely successful. The undergraduate students come back and attend graduate programs in the United States or other countries, and many of them go home and take over their family businesses or work for other multinational companies. So I'm always so pleased when I'm in China and I see one of our graduates and they praise the program.
Right.
We started at 33% visa success rate, and last year we reached 100%, which means every student that applies for our program has been accepted.
Wow, that's a real accomplishment.
That is an accomplishment.
And the other thing is the commitment of the Chinese universities to this program, as
Yes.
well as the American.
Yes.
It's very clear that they perceive this as a unique value
Yes.
in China. What about the impact in America? No, you go ahead and answer first.
I was going to say that I'll answer your question and then I'll go on and talk about how this particular project has been the foundation for 6 or 7 other projects that we have since developed. And
so my question was really the impact in America, because we're talking about, in some cases, pretty small institutions without high budgets who may not have had much international education suddenly receiving the Chinese student.
when I first started promoting this program in China, I was adamant about moving out into the provinces. I wanted the students that participate in this program to mirror the students that we serve on ASCU campuses. ASCU membership, the 420 institutions are located from everything from urban centers to rural centers. The students that attend the ASCU institutions are normally first-generation students, being born, educated, working in a community that is within 100 miles of the institution that they serve. And so those are the types of schools that I look for in China. Having the same issues, first-generation students living outside of Beijing and Shanghai and Guangzhou in the provinces, where they would spend the rest of their lives working and raising their families.
Right.
And we have been extremely successful in identifying institutions in the other provinces. And the participation of these students on campus has been phenomenal. Everything from, participating in student activities, to being ambassadors in the community, to being mentors and leaders on the ASCU campus that they are attending. And so not only have they come as international students, but they have really left as ambassadors for the institution that they have attended, recognized by the communities as being a great citizen of the university and the greater community that surrounds the university. Because they have become so infused in these communities, I think they have touched the lives of everyone, not just the student that might be sitting next to them or the faculty member that's learning more about China by having a student in a class, but by visiting high schools in the community, the revenue that they bring into the community, the store owners, the community people. I think their presence in places like Troy, Alabama, Wisconsin, Eau Claire, CSU campuses, San Bernardino and Fresno, just to name a few of the schools, Salem State in Massachusetts. These are places where 14 years ago they probably had very small numbers of international students, and so when the students arrived, the campus embraced them, the community embraced them, and people that may not have ever known where some of these cities were in China now have an interest in Chinese New Year's, in learning some words in the language, and it's
And have made friends.
Yes,
They have Chinese friends.
It's been a wonderful experiment in how you can bring the world closer
To the American campus. And also, and it's something that we've talked about in other interviews, 97% of the American undergraduate population never goes abroad.
Wow.
So bringing abroad to them in a way that really touches them is a really important contribution.
Of course it is, because I think when you're able to touch another person from another land that you may never get to, it brings it closer to you, and it allows you to be a little bit more attentive
Right.
about issues in that country, about things that concern your life, and knowing that the very things that you are concerned about, people halfway around the world have the same concerns. Yeah.
And what did this 1-2-1 program success lead to? What was it a foundation for that ASCII could build upon?
From there we developed a visiting scholar program. We bring about 100 Chinese faculty for one semester or an academic year to our ASCII campuses. We've been sending about 40 to 50 American faculty to China for teaching or research on the participating campuses. We have created a YES program, a short-term program, a youth exchange for students that want to come from China for less than a year to do language immersion and culture, some academics, but minimal. We have created a summer study abroad program for ASCII campuses to send students to China. We realized when we started the program that the lack of a language proficiency 14 or 15 years ago by American students would not allow them to be competitive in the classroom.
You can't do an exchange, right?
There's no way you could do an exchange, but what we decided to do was a summer study for students. We have created a scholarship program for students of color and students that are financially experiencing financial hardship. Mm-hmm. So we have a fund that they can apply to and receive scholarship dollars to participate in the summer study abroad. We have worked with the Chinese government scholarship program and have 25 set-aside full-year scholarships for ASCII campuses for students that want to study in China for a year. We have developed something called Teaching English Learning Chinese, TELC, a program that allows recent graduates, whether undergraduate or graduate, to teach in Shanghai province for 1 or 2 years in a primary secondary school. We have done training for Chinese presidents and vice presidents that are new to their positions, because you may be fantastic in your academic field and have all types of accomplishments, but you may never have had training to be an administrator.
Right.
And so the Chinese are taking their brightest and putting them into these their brightest academics and putting them in these administrative positions, and we found that there is a gap there, and so we have offered them a mentoring and shadowing program with ASCII presidents and provosts, and that has been extremely successful. And as a sidebar, I think the thing that surprised me the most was this cohort of newly appointed vice presidents and presidents. When we put them in a room to talk about their experience, they were more concerned about what was happening on the campuses within China, because many of them had never come together and had the opportunity to share their challenges, their wish lists.
Of course.
In these new professions.
Right.
So I think the experience was twofold or multifolded, in that they were able to have the confidence of an American counterpart, that they could really be in a safe environment to talk about those things that they needed to know to be the skill set and the knowledge base that they needed to know to be more effective in their position. But then they also learned from each other. Yeah. And they were able to go back and share those experiences and begin to develop them in the context of a Chinese higher education model.
And they're developing an internal support system
Exactly.
for one another, which is phenomenal.
It was phenomenal. That was a great experience for us. We continue to offer the SALT program every October. We take a group of ASCU administrators, faculty, deans. We're now seeing teams, repeat teams from universities that have traveled with us before.
American institutions?
Yes, ASCU members that go over to China in the fall for an international forum and expo, where about 40,000 students come to the door in 48 hours looking for opportunities outside, educational opportunities outside of China. And they are also there to participate in the ASCU one-day seminar in which we introduce them to educators from China so that they can begin to develop institutional partnerships.
So you develop a whole series of programs and services for both the American and the Chinese institutions with whom you work,
Yes.
and allowed on each side for the possibility of growth.
Yes.
And that's, as an association, you're able to do it for multiple institutions, which I think is what's so unique in the work that you and others at the associations are now doing.
It has been a service to our membership.
Right.
It has allowed campuses to really begin to have a discussion around comprehensive internationalization on their campus, and what does that mean vis-a-vis establishing programs, particularly in China, that were and are mutually beneficial to the Chinese and to the American institutions.
And how did your success with China begin to translate with other parts of the world where ASCU is working, as well as the work you do with domestic campuses? What other parts of the world do you work in, and what kind of work do you do?
We have been working in Liberia since about 2006. You know, that's a country that was in 14 years of civil war.
Right.
Totally dismantled every aspect of life in that country. President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf came to ASCU and asked us if we would work with her administration. We did. We wrote some white papers. I pulled in representatives from some of our ASCU campuses that had Africa experience. We wrote a series of white papers. We went to Liberia. We did training of university administrators that were coming back into these positions. We did training for government officials that would be working in the Ministry of Education. The white papers centered around creating educational options outside of Monrovia because the war just pulled everyone to the capital and it was really breaking down the infrastructure of the city. And then we went on to work with the University of Liberia to establish some professional development training opportunities for faculty and RAs and TAs so that they could begin to get people back into the classroom and get the university, you know, up and running again. The training, the George Mason University took the lead in the training, and when they got there, they realized that there was a lot of post-stress syndrome going on, so the team expanded by bringing in some other people to also work on some of those issues. It was a very successful project. President has thanked ASCU's president for being so involved that she worked to reconstruct the educational system in Liberia after so many years of trauma.
Right. And you've gone on to do some other work in Africa as well?
Yes. We've done some training in Comoros and Madagascar. We've had presidential missions to South Africa, to Morocco, to Chile, to Brazil, to Cuba. One of my responsibilities is to create a presidential mission every year to a non-traditional site and to allow presidents to familiarize themselves with the educational systems in those countries so that they can go on to develop programs there.
So in other areas, you're continuing to move into other international areas as well.
Yeah, we're looking at...
And you're doing new things in China, I believe, as well.
Yes, we're looking at Brazil, Peru, and Chile. One of our ASCU campuses, CSU Pomona, just received an opportunity to do training for technical schools in Chile that took us about 3 years for the ministry to agree, but I think we're on track now. They've offered this opportunity to one of our campuses. So part of my job as I travel is to make the contacts on behalf of our institutions,
Right.
and bring opportunities to those institutions,
Right.
so that they will be able to increase their international footprint in other countries. Yes, and to go back to China, we've recently partnered with Suzhou International Enterprise to create an innovation center in Shanghai. And this will be an opportunity for not only ASCU institutions, but other institutions to join in providing a location in which we can conduct seminars and training and international conferences. I'm very excited about the potential of this center because ASCU has never done anything like this before, and I would venture to say none of the higher ed associations have. And so this will really allow us a presence not only in China, but will allow higher education institutions from all around the world to come together around critical issues and concerns in international education.
So you've really seen an arc of change since you joined ASCU in the whole field of international education and also in what can be done at the association level.
Most definitely.
To impact it enormously. And I know that you work in Japan, I know that you do other work in other parts of the world, so that ASCU is both reaching out and being reached out to, if that's the right way to say it, by both foreign governments, but in the end what you're doing it is on behalf of your member institutions.
Exactly.
And domestically, what kind of work do you do with member institutions? I know, for example, that you go to campuses that are trying to internationalize and help them create plans.
Yes, I do. And that has become more and more a part of my work each year. We go in and do a SWOT analysis of what's happening on the campus, meet with all the stakeholders, and then provide a short report of recommendations to the president and the provost. And surprisingly enough, they follow them. So
it's always very satisfying.
It's very satisfying.
Right.
But they are following them. I just made a return visit to a campus that I had visited 5 years ago to see if they had made progress towards the recommendations that I made then, and what can they do now to move forward. So it's rewarding to see that we are providing a service to our members, but a service that's needed and a service that they appreciate, and they use it as a benchmark on which to measure what they're doing and to build and to take their campus to the next level of internationalization.
So in terms of your own career, you started when the whole idea of international education was independently, individually led on campuses,
Oh, yes.
in associations or consulting organizations like the one that you had for such a very long time. And what you're seeing now is a much broader commitment to this idea of international education being an important part of all types of American institutions.
Almost definitely. I mean, it's a radical shift. You saw maybe 15 or 20 years ago one person in a little room somewhere signing I-20s, and that was
would have been you and me.
Right.
Right.
We were doing that.
30 years ago.
30 years ago.
Yeah.
30 years ago, yeah, we were doing that then. Just signing the documents, making sure the students came, maybe what was orientation, a couple of hours, and then sent off to the housing office or whatever. But now you see buildings that are centers of international education. You see faculty involvement in revising the curriculum and infusing the curriculum with such a wealth of perspectives from other countries and other cultures. That was very spotty 30 years ago. And you see a broader campus dialogue on the majority of campuses, even if it's just at the baby level to the advanced level, there is this conversation occurring now on campus. because I think everyone realized that we can no longer consider ourselves as just living and working in our own community. You know, as in St. Cloud, Minnesota, they saw that now they have all these Somalis living there because of the, you know, the forced migration and the refugees that are coming in. And so you see the communities that you live in changing daily because of international situations, political situations, economic situations that are driving rapid change. And as public institutions, we no longer can be just a classroom. We have to step beyond that. And one of the ways that ASCU institutions define themselves is being a steward of place. You know, whose responsibility is not just in the classroom, it transcends the walls of academia to the greater community. And we must be involved in making certain that the economic development of the region that the institution serves is sound, that there are job opportunities, there are, you know, opportunities for all people, not only within the confines of academia, but in the broader sense as it transcends into the community in which the institution serves.
And that idea of steward in place is really an incredible next step.
Yes.
In the whole field of international education.
Mm-hmm. And I think in some ways public institutions will take the lead in defining how stewards of place will be defined throughout the higher education.
And why do you say that?
Because I think that they're being driven to serve these communities.
Yes.
And in ways that other institutions may not be.
Right, right. Well, you've certainly seen the arc of change. You've certainly contributed to that arc of change in the work that you have done at ASCU. I know that you've been very active yourself, contributing your knowledge. You're on the board of NAFSA.
Yes.
You're a longtime member of AIEA, and having walked from a luncheon to this room with you, I realize that you personify what AIEA likes to talk about as its networking contribution, because so many people who are here and you have worked together through the work that you've described. So it's actually a great opportunity to have this conversation with you, because you and only a few others will bring this whole association level to the conversation that we're having in this digital archive series, and it is a very unique level. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, and I'm just so pleased that as we walk through the AIEA conferences, that we see young people, we see much more diverse participants than we ever saw 30 years ago, and it just makes me so proud to be a member of this profession and know that we are able to make change and be a part of change.
Well, you certainly have, and so thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you.